Hey everyone, my name is Alexandra and I'm a watercolor artist. Today I want to show you guys how to paint water, specifically with a reflection with watercolor. This is something that is honestly so helpful to learn, especially if you like to do a lot of scenery and nature paintings. Let's get started. For supplies today, you guys will need 2 cups of water. I have one for clean, one for dirty water, a napkin for drying your paintbrushes. Paintbrushes, I'm using Princeton rounds, numbers 2, 6, and 8. For paper, I have 140 pound cold press watercolor paper. And lastly, for paints, I'm using Art Philosophy & Co.'s Woodlands palette, as well as I've taken a yellow and a green from a terrain palette. But essentially, if you guys have a photo for reference that you're going off of, then that is kind of how you can choose whichever colors you'll need for your painting. So the first thing that I've done to prep my paper is I've actually taped it down just because we're going to be using a lot of water for this. I want to help just keep it steady so that it doesn't buckle as well. Next thing that I have done is I've drawn a line pretty much across the center of my page, and that's just so that I know where my water starts and that's where my reflection is going to start as well. So before we go down to painting our reflection, we are going to work on painting the top half of our paper. So I'm actually just gonna start by painting in the sky. We're gonna keep it super simple. Might add a few clouds, but general idea is that I'm gonna go in with my really watered down stream blue. And I'm just gonna fill in this top portion of my page. Now I am going to be adding some mountains in behind my trees before I paint them. So instead of painting more of the sky and then having to do the mountains on top, I'm actually just gonna paint the shapes of them directly with my blue paint. Now it might be a little bit trickier to see right now, but as we go, you guys will be able to see the lines a little bit better. I'm not specifically following a certain mountain range for this. I'm just painting a general painting, so you guys can kind of just freehand with what shape you want your mountains to be, kind of with the key that there's 1 or 2 peaks in it, but the rest of it is fine to just sort of flow. Now, while my paint is still damp, I'm gonna add some brighter blue into it for my sky. And then working relatively quickly while it's still wet, I want to clean off my brush, and I'm just gonna pick up some of the paint so that we can kind of imitate some clouds here. So you might have to rinse your brush and try a few times. I'm gonna switch to a smaller brush for this, just so I can have a little bit more control. And we're just picking up that paint. And then if I want them to stand out even more, I can go in with some of my blue. Oh, I had some green in there. Just gonna blend that out a little bit. Make sure that I just have blue. And you can essentially work your way around where the cloud was that you painted, and it'll just make it stand out that much more. Okay, so now that our sky is done, we can start working on our mountains. Mountains, again, aren't necessarily gonna be the main focal point of this, so I'm gonna keep them super, super subtle. I'm keeping them really light right now because I wanna put trees in front of them. So I'm going in with a really, really light gray, and I'm essentially just painting in the shape of them, and then we'll add some details later. So I'm not necessarily going all the way to the bottom because I know that I'm going to fill that area with trees. And I don't mind if I leave a little bit of white on my mountains here, because I can also give the idea that maybe there's some snow left on them. So to do that, you're just leaving some white gaps. I'm painting this really messy, honestly. Not too picky about it, because we're gonna put trees in front and that's gonna be our main focus for our reflection. Okay, so now that we've done both of those, we're gonna let those two layers dry, and then we'll put our layer of trees in front of them. Now that that's mostly dry, we're gonna go in and add some pine trees. So I'm gonna go with my number 2 brush. I wanted to use really small detail here. And I'm just gonna go into my deep moss green. And I have another a little bit more warm green here from the terrain palette. And I'm gonna mix my paint. Now for these trees, I'm painting them pretty small on this painting. I do have a tutorial on how to paint watercolor pine trees. If you guys want to pause this video, check that out and then come back to it, you're more than welcome to. But the idea for this painting is that these mountains are way in behind and the trees are really sitting up front. So they're gonna be much taller. And then I'm actually gonna add in some fall trees sort of mixed in there just to go with the season and add some color for our reflection. So I'm painting a super skinny line going straight down to that water line that I have. And then I'm just dotting on either side of my tree to add the branches in. So because it's small, just keeping it really simple, but I want this section to be a little bit more detailed than the reflection. So we're just gonna add some different heights and we're just dotting in those branches. Again, feel free to check out my longer tutorial for a little bit more detail on how to do this. But the idea is that I'm dotting in lines essentially in the shape of where the branches would go and then working my way wider as I head towards the bottom. So I might do a tall, skinny one over here. Now I'm not following it exactly, but this painting is actually inspired by a picture that I have from a hike that I did out in Revelstoke area. And there's just such a beautiful tree line that goes right across the lake. It's honestly so stunning all times of year, but because there's sort of a mountain cliff behind it, it looks really neat. It almost looks like the trees are just floating in front. And I can add maybe a really little tree right beside. And we'll add some more detail to these as we go. So I'll do some more clusters over here. And it's okay if this first layer is a little bit more watered down. We can add some more color to it after as we go. So I'm just working my way along the painting, adding more trees in. So I might add a couple more in the center here, and then I'm just going to add some bushes down below. Okay, so now that I've painted those, in the photo that I'm using as sort of reference, you can kind of see that the trees end a little bit and there's like a little bit of a sandy beach right in front. So I'm just gonna go in and paint just a really thin kind of gray brown line, coming right below, still following that pencil line that I had drawn. And then we can go in and add some of our bushes. So I will do a mixture. I'm gonna do a few kind of brighter, still green bushes, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the fall colored ones. Okay, so we'll just do some clusters to paint these. I'm just doing little clusters of dots. I'm wanting to make sure that it's a different color from my trees, just so that you can really tell the separation between the two. And if you're noticing that that mountain line doesn't come down low enough, that is okay. We can add more to it after. So we have our few green bushes here. And then while it's still wet, we can go in and add some more yellow ones. And we'll add a little bit of detail to them once they dry a bit. Just painting in those bushes along the bottom. I can even add, since we're going with the fall theme, I'm gonna go into my foxberry red here, and we'll mix a little bit of that in as well. And I can do them, if I want, to sort of look like they're sitting in behind. Have a nice mix of them here. And now that I've done the bushes, I'm gonna actually paint a few more pine trees that look now like they're sitting in behind where the bushes are. Now, while you're painting these things, keep in mind that the more detail and more items we add to our image on top, the more we're going to have to add into our reflection as well. So now I'm going to go in with some more fine detail on some of these trees. And I'm essentially taking just a more pigmented version of the same green that I was painting with. And I'm adding dots over portions of the tree to give it a lot more detail to it, while still keeping it subtle, because keeping in mind we're painting this painting very small, so we don't actually have room to do a ton of detail, but I want to make sure that these are still standing out really nicely. And then with our more yellow green, we can do the same idea and just add a little bit more paint to our bushes. Don't need to do a ton for these, just add that little bit of variation of texture. So same idea with our yellow paint. Just add a little bit more texture, a little bit more variation of color. And now that we've done that, we're going to bring that gray color down a little bit more from our mountain in behind, just so that it doesn't look like it cuts off like it does now. So with my gray paint, I can just carry that down. And it's okay if it mixes with some of the other colors, I don't mind. All right, now to make our mountain stand out just a little bit more, I'm actually going to mix some blue with a little bit of this foxberry red here. I want to get sort of a purple color. It's looking a little bit more on the gray end, but I don't mind. I'm gonna water it down, and we're just gonna add some shading to our mountain. So the idea is that you're painting really simple lines coming down to just imitate the shadows on the mountain. For this specifically, whether you're painting a specific mountain or not, I find it's really helpful just to take a look at a picture and kind of see where more of those shadows lie. So I can even lean it a little bit more towards a blue color if I want. Get a little bit too purple there. And we can just carry down. So some of this, if I feel like it's too purple, I can just go right over top. And I'm just painting really loose, messy lines. I'm honestly not doing that much with this, but it's just giving it a really, really simple way to add definition to your painting. Okay, so that is all we have for the top layer of our mountain. You guys definitely could spend a lot more time on this and go much more detailed, but for our purposes, I'm gonna leave it at that, and we're gonna start by painting the water. We're gonna take a brief pause in this tutorial because I have something to tell you guys. I am so excited to introduce my new course, From Palette to Paper, A Beginner's Guide to Watercolor. In this course, we do a deep dive into all of the foundational watercolor techniques. Then we go into depth painting florals, and after that, we combine it all into one beautiful floral masterpiece. I have a link in the description below for more information, so go check it out. So to start with the water, we're actually gonna start with a wet on wet technique. And then as it dries, we're gonna add in more details. Okay, so I'm starting with my larger paintbrush using my number 8 brush, and I am actually just fully covering the base of this with water. And I'm going all the way up to this line right here. And once I've done that, we can start going in with our watercolor. So I'm actually gonna mix a tiny bit of my stream blue with this mist. And I am just gonna start by fully painting it in, going a little bit lighter towards the top where we're going to be adding that reflection. Now I find that often as you come closer to yourself, if this is hypothetically where the shoreline is, then you might even get some rocks or sand or things underneath. So what I like to do is mix together sort of a sandy color, and I like to paint that kind of right at the base. We're not doing too much detail here, but it's just gonna give the illusion that there's something underneath the water there. Now, while it's wet, we're gonna have to work relatively quickly, so feel free to pause this video as much as you need, go back as much as you'd like, but I'm gonna work pretty quick to just get these shapes onto my paper. So using actually I'm gonna start with my number 2 brush and my green paint. The idea is, if it's a perfectly still lake, then you're gonna go with really defined shadows below, I guess, reflections below. This one, I'm gonna assume that there's a little bit of wind there, so we're gonna do it a little bit more loose, but essentially each tree and shape that I'm following, what you want to do is paint in kind of the same shape. I have it a touch more watered down, and I'm essentially just dotting it in and just scribbling that reflection. So we can add more details as this dries more. But for now, we're just following that super basic shape. And because it's wet, the colors are gonna spread a lot more, so you wanna be careful to not have too much paint coming down. But we're just working on those reflections, following that general triangle shape of the trees. And now moving quickly, I can go into that more yellow-green and paint those bushes that I've added. And then the same idea with our yellow. Just placing it wherever you see it on your painting above. Now, one more thing that we have here that I do want to add in is just that little bit of the mountain reflection, but this one I want to keep it super subtle. So I'm going with my gray paint. I can kind of follow where that tallest point is. And I'm just working in that shape. All right, so we can see right now we have a really nice kind of blurry reflection. As this paint dries, I'm just gonna add a touch more water to it because I want to add more of that water texture in. So while it's still damp, I'm gonna go, actually I'll stick with my number 6 brush, going into my stream blue, and I'm just gonna start adding some really gentle strokes into my water, and we're just kind of trying to show the ripples in the water. And as we work our way back kind of closer to where the reflection and the mountains are, then those strokes are going to get a lot smaller, so you can get a little bit more perspective in there. Now, the nice thing about fully saturating your painting is that you actually have quite a bit of time to work with these colors. Now, one thing that I think if I was more intentional with putting clouds in my sky that I would pay attention to is also adding the reflection for the clouds. But because I didn't really add too much detail to them, it's okay. We're just going to focus on the reflection of the mountains and the trees. Okay, so now that that is added in a little bit better, we're gonna add more color for our trees and just give them some more definition. So I'm going a little bit darker, but still watered down. And now I'm just going over top of where I've painted already and being a little bit more intentional with my shapes. But the idea is that I'm generally painting everything with side strokes rather than anything up and down. And that's just going to imitate the movement of the water much, much better. So side strokes to paint my trees. So that's one of the things that really gives it the look that it is a reflection and not just the same image upside down. Sometimes if I want it to look like a really clear and still reflection, then the idea is to paint it upside down and essentially just paint the exact same thing. But for our purposes today, wanting to keep it looking really nice and loose. So right away, you guys can actually see that the trees are looking a lot more defined. I can even make them a little bit longer in the reflection than maybe they are in the main photo. And then we're gonna go over our bushes and just continue with the same idea. So just adding another layer, keeping to those kind of side strokes. Okay, so now that I'm getting that done and it's looking so much more clear, I'm noticing that the separation between my trees and the water is starting to look a little bit muddy. So where I had painted this line of kind of where the dirt at the edge of the sand might be, I'm actually gonna go in and just add a little bit more contrast there. So I'm just gonna define it more and make it darker. I've also lost a little bit of my reflection of that mountain range while I was adding in the blue paint. So we can also go in and just touch that up a little bit. This time I'm going to focus on those kind of side strokes to get that shape. This brush is a little too small, so we'll switch to our number 6. Again, just those loose side strokes. Just to imitate that general shape of the mountain. And we have a little bit over here, working its way in between the trees. All right, so we are nearly done. Last thing that I want to do is just add a touch more definition to our water to really finish off the reflection. So into my water, I'm just painting kind of these loose half circle shapes, and that's to just show us the ripple effect of the water. Don't need to be too particular with this, but I find it just really brings it together. And I can blend them out just a little bit if I want. And then if I take this blue and just gently go over where I've already painted, it's just gonna make everything a little bit more cohesive. So now we are done with painting our watercolor reflection. If you guys wanna see a more detailed version on how to do this, I can definitely show you that, so leave a comment below if you are interested. Otherwise, if you haven't already, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time.